Hello and good evening. Good evening. Hello and hello. My name is Sho Baraka. I am the editorial director of Big Tent at Christianity Today, and I am extremely excited about this webinar today. This conversation we're going to have. We're going to have some wonderful guests. We're going to have a wonderful discussion. We're going to engage with our audience. But let me first start off with praying for our time before we get into an introduction and we bring on our panelists. Dear Lord, thank you for this night. Thank you for your grace and your abundance, Lord. As we all wrestle with different issues and we overcome different obstacles, we know that you're a God that controls all. You're the God of yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And you are ever present. So be with us today. Give us words of wisdom. Let there be great discussion. Let the Spirit dwell within us richly that we may encourage one another as long as it's called today, so our hearts won't be hardened by sin's deceitfulness. We know we live in desperate times, Lord, and we ask that you would give us encouragement for today, that we can create capstones for those who will be in the kingdom work tomorrow, and that this work that we're going to be discussing, this documentary, not only just honors the past, but it blesses the present and gives hope to the future. And it's in your wonderful Son, Jesus' name, we pray. Amen. So, as I said, my name is Sho Baraka. I am the editorial director of Big Tent. Big Tent Initiative is something that is fairly new with CT, and our goal is to expand the voice of CT in a way that displays the manifold wisdom of God. And I think the reason why we're gathered today is just that, to discuss a project called Black plus Evangelical that has done an amazing work thus far. And just to give a kind of a little bit of why we're doing this discussion, I'll give you a little of my personal anecdote. When I grew up, I went to church sparingly. Football was, for the most part, our form of worship and reasonable service in our house. So we didn't go to church all the time. But when we did go to church, we went to a missionary Baptist church. I mean, choir, shouting. Every testimony started with first giving honor to God, who is the head of my life. Some of y'all know what I'm talking about. But Christianity was not a core memory in our household. And but then I went to college and I became a Christian through college ministry. And while at this college ministry, one was Impact and the other Campus Outreach, um, I still attended a pretty traditional black church. But it wasn't too long after that that I learned that there was a methodological, maybe sociological, and sometimes some even theological differences, I guess, between the church that I was attending and the college ministry that was, I guess you can say, discipling me. Um, but I loved both of these ecosystems, and it later I started to realize that there was probably some tension, not just um, methodological tensions, but also some social tensions and racial tensions. And so that is one of the reasons why I think this discussion is important because there are a lot of individuals there who honestly don't really have a concept of what does it really mean to be evangelical? What does uh, evangelical come from? What's the history, not only of evangelicalism at large, but with Black folks? And some people, and we don't want to be naive, there are some people who are going to be on this call and are on this watching this webinar who don't associate themselves as evangelical. I don't necessarily run around calling myself an evangelical myself. But the one thing that I think is important is that we may not call ourselves evangelicals, but I know all the people on this call love the people, the movement, and the history that cultivated them. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm excited about this project. And so I want to give a shout out to Wheaton and CT for this particular project. I am an executive director of this thing, and you're going to be able to meet some of the directors and the people behind it. And so just much love and appreciation. So the way that this is going to go, we're going to introduce two individuals. We're going to have a discussion, and for about 20 minutes. And then after that 20 minutes, I'm going to introduce some other individuals who are a part of the documentary. So the first part of this discussion is going to be mainly just about evangelicalism in a broad sense. Then the next part of the conversation will be about the documentary. And no later than 7:45, we will actually start to take questions from you, the audience. And so, as of now, once you begin to have questions, please put them in the chat and we will start to feed them to our panelists once we have the larger Q&A. I want to go ahead and just introduce our first panelist. I've had a wonderful opportunity of getting to know this brother. I've known him for some years now. Dr. Vince Bacote is a professor of theology and director of the Center for Applied Christian Ethics at Wheaton College. He is the narrator and co-creator of the film Black and Evangelical. Then we have Jessica Janvier, and she is a writer and academic who focuses on focus crosses the intersection of African American religion history, church history, and theology. She obtained her PhD from Columbia International University, holds a Master of Divinity from Nyack College. She has a Master of Theology and Church History from Princeton Theological Seminary. She currently works in the Intercultural Studies Department at Columbia International University and is an adjunct professor at the Meacham School of Hermeneut, and she serves as an associate professor for Butler Memorial United Methodist Church. Thank you, Dr. Vince Bacote, and we're going to get Jessica Janvier to join us, and we're going to start off with some questions. So, blessings, blessings, blessings. Thank you guys for joining us. The first question, and maybe the most difficult question, if you guys both want to take a stab at this, but Dr. Bacote, first, what is evangelicalism? I don't want to assume that people know what that means, but what is evangelicalism?
Because you put ism on it, that means you're talking about a movement, you're talking about something where there may be institutional realities associated with it. And so if we talk about it that way, then we're talking about a movement that emerges out of this thing called fundamentalism in the early 20th century. And it's Protestants very committed to the Bible that want to be more engaged intellectually. They are people who have common affirmation. They'll say, if I'm a Baptist and you're a Methodist and you're a Presbyterian and you're an Anglican, we may never agree about what happens with the Lord's Supper or about eschatology or other things, but we do agree about the main things. And so I agree that you're a Christian and we have common cause. And so those core commitments are what make those people evangelicals. And then you get a movement that has all kinds of associations, colleges, schools, parachurch organizations, and some denominations that emerge as well. Or there are people who identify with the movement that stay in what we call mainline denominations. I think it's important to note that uh, Black evangelicals have been somewhat part of that movement, but have become more, I would say, part of that movement in the 50, 60, last 50, 60, 70 years. And what I mean by that is because of not having being in having those denominational associations. And so in that sense, that's what evangelicalism is, that movement that it does have largely a white institutional character to it. There, if you're talking about the beliefs of evangelicals, then we would say that African Americans have kind of just been that way, is what we would say.
Yeah. Dr. Janvier, as a historian, would you answer that question any differently, or how would you approach it?
Yeah, so I do look at it differently from a historian's perspective. I'm looking at it from its period of origination, which is the late 1730s, early 1740s, and I'm looking at it from a phenomenological perspective. So I would define evangelicalism in its original period as a Protestant movement deriving from the Great Awakening revivals that produced a Christian orientation or a Christian tradition that is marked by these markers: interdenominationalism, providing some type of Catholicity to diverse Protestant groups, galvanized by evangelism, bibliocentric, anti-Roman Catholic in its original years, Orthodox in its self-understanding. In a world where there are many different forms of Protestantism, evangelicalism is making the claim that it is the Orthodox version of Protestantism, and it is a form of Protestant Christianity that is Christocentric in its interpretation of the gospel. So
Mm,
that's how I look at it. And from that perspective, Black people have been a part of evangelicalism from the beginning.
mm.
And in that milieu where evangelicalism was being born and shaped and coming into its own, that's the period where the first independent Black churches were formed. And so if you want to see the first Black evangelicals, you go back to those first Black independent churches, those first um, revivals, and you find Black evangelicals from the beginning.
All right, so quick question. Oftentimes I have these discussions with people, or this discussion, and people want to know, was the word evangelical used by Black people post or pre 1900s? How would you answer that question? And did they consider themselves evangelicals?
Yeah, so you do find Black people using the word evangelical. And if you ask the question, did they consider themselves evangelicals at that time? It's a double-edged sword. So I'll give you an example from Frederick Douglass to illustrate what I'm talking about. Right after the Civil War, let's say 20 years after the Civil War, Frederick Douglass is making a speech denouncing Dwight Moody. And he is denouncing Moody and saying, I'm disappointed in Moody because he's having segregated revivals. It's a shame that the Negroes can't go into an evangelical meeting without being segregated. Now, when you look at slave narratives from that period, you do also find Black people identifying themselves as evangelical and with the evangelical movement and requesting evangelical pastors. So if you want to find where Black people are using the term evangelical to describe themselves, you look to the slave narratives, which
Mm,
they're about 3,000. And if you want to find where Black people are also distancing themselves from the term evangelical because of some of the movement's pro-slavery people, then you
interesting.
also look at slave narratives.
Mm,
Gotcha.
mm.
Dr. Bacote, this first of all, congratulations on this documentary. Wonderful piece of work. Uh,
Thank you.
why though? Like especially today. Like why?
Why? Okay. No, thank you
When
for asking that. Well, I wasn't looking to make a documentary back in 2008. I was looking after an event at Fuller Seminary in 2008 where a man named Ron Potter was part of the group of people, and it occurred to me that he had the history of Black evangelicals in his head. I wanted people to know about people that they probably didn't know about, and that there about whom there was not a lot written. And so I wanted there to just be at least in an archival sense.
yeah,
Hey, put Ron Potter in front of a camera and just talk, and I'll feed you questions. And naively, I thought I could get that done in 80 minutes. That didn't happen. And so that was the idea beginning in 2008. And then we didn't do the first interview until 2021, actually. And by then, Christianity Today had become a partner in it. And so Ed and I brought Ron to campus, and then we went from one interview to 24. Dan Long had a lot to do with that as well. We'll talk about that piece later. But why? One, because it's an important story to tell for a few reasons. One, you know, if I ask people, okay, if you're seeing a documentary about Black church, you're not seeing a documentary about Black church that's telling the story the way that we're talking about it. There aren't a lot of them doing that. There's some, but there aren't a lot of them, right? So that's part of it. A part of it's also, timely in the sense that there is this massive crisis of dissonance with the term evangelical itself and evangelical movements, and people who come to places like Wheaton College or in the Navigators, like I was in college. They have some kind of interface with it. They may not be part of an evangelical church or parachurch group now, but it had something to do with their formation. And a lot of those people, particularly an inflection point is a certain election in 2016. Since that election, there's been a lot of intensified dissonance around that.
yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's important for people to understand that actually that dissonant experience is not a new experience.
Right.
And that
Yeah.
there are a lot of people who've had this experience for decades, in fact, centuries. Dr. Janvier would tell us. So, So I think it's important for people to know this history. I think it's important for people to know that in this documentary, you can meet people that have been where you've been and
Mm,
they have named what you've named. And to
mm,
me, it's very important that people see that we can name those things, but we can
yeah,
do more than just the naming. We can also be talking about, okay, now how are we going to use our agency to pursue lives of faithfulness, where we are in various, Christian settings. And it's not, and this is also very important to say. It's not so people then necessarily call themselves evangelicals. I
okay,
want people to just be faithful Christians, whether they use that label or not.
yeah,
And to me, it's important to say, hey, you can pursue that life of faithfulness without having to deal with the baggage of the label.
yeah.
Right. And so to me, it's very important. And I think the documentary is one of the ways of helping to address that.
Yeah, I think oftentimes each generation feels like the problems they face are problems that they've only faced, and they feel like they have to create new solutions. When oftentimes we'll look at this documentary and you'll see the Bill Purnells and the Thomas Skinners and seeing that they dealt with the same types of tensions we dealt with. For example, in around 2010 to 2012, I myself experimented with seminary, and I noticed when I went to seminary, I would sit in these classes and I would be frustrated because anytime we would talk about church history or extol the mercies of God, they were only talking about white men. Sometimes these white men owned slaves. And I would think, were there not any Christians that were of color who contributed to the faith in this country? And the more I started to research, the more I said, "Oh, now this is good. This is excellent." However, I felt like that history they thought was solely for me and not for everybody. So when you think about this documentary, who is this documentary for? Although I feel like I'm leading you, but is this
Oh, leading the
documentary
witness is
just
fine.
for is the documentary just for Black evangelicals, or is this documentary for everybody and to encompass the greater kind of
Sure.
canon of Christianity in this nation?
Sure. I think of it in terms of concentric circles. The smallest circle is people that be some kind of you're black evangelical, at least in terms of your experience.
Hmm.
You went to a Wheaton college, but you grew up Kojic, and now you live in the world of Kojic, but you had that interfaith, or something similar. So those people, then minorities who've been in evangelical spaces, then the evangelical people movement writ large, then the rest of Christianity, then the larger public.
Mm,
Because it is not a special interest story. It is a church story
yeah.
that the world needs to know about,
Amen.
not just that people who care about certain issues need to care about.
Yeah.
If the church is a global family, and this is part of the story of the global family.
I don't know if we lost Jessica Janvier, Dr. Janvier, are you there? Okay. Oh yeah, there we go. I have a question for you. All right. So why are these stories important? Why is it important for the next generation to know the individuals that you've talked about? You talked about Douglas, you've written pieces about Morant. Why are these individuals important in history for us to know today?
Um, at least for me, they're important for two reasons. For one reason, it's important for us to be able to show a history of African American Christianity that holds together orthodoxy and orthopraxy, and to be able to say that
Hey.
that didn't start with white evangelicals. And importantly for me too, is to be able to say, particularly for the period that I deal with historically, is to say that the Black Christian intellectual tradition didn't start in the 20th century. But when you want to look at Black theologians who are really getting down from reading the church fathers to going toe to toe with white evangelicals or just staying in their own lanes, nourishing their own communities. That history began with the rise of Black evangelicalism and particularly going towards the Second Great Awakening. So the Black evangelical tradition, we need to say, or the Black Christian intellectual tradition, we need to clearly say, did not start when Black evangelicals found themselves articulating the faith in the evangelical paradigm in the 20th century, but it has a long tradition. So for at
Yeah.
least me, those are two reasons I think we need to tell this history.
I look. So the most impressive part of all of that is when you threw the little kind of like hip hop colloquial where you said it was getting down. Um, is that is that how you teach? And Mitchell, you these brothers and sisters are getting down. Last question for you before we bring on our other panelists to talk about more specifically the documentary. Why do you call yourself evangelical, especially in 2025?
Okay.
What are you
Assuming
So,
asking first?
I'm gonna
right.
go ahead and let's ask Dr. Janvier and then
Okay.
Dr. Bacote because I know Bacote is gonna probably have a good 10-minute run at this. So let's
Yeah, I'll be quick. I do and I don't. Long story short, I do and I don't. I very much so resonate with what Carl Ellis was saying in terms of how he uses evangelical. Depending on who I'm talking to in American context, I may use it or I may not use it. I like to describe myself as an Orthodox ecumenical Christian.
Mm,
Um, if evangelical is handy, I'll use that too. Now, on a global stage, my family is African American and Haitian American. And so I find it important for us to connect to the diaspora outside of America. And they do use evangelical. And it's not because of socio-political reasonings, but Black people outside of America use evangelical to speak about gospel-centered Protestantism. And so
mm.
for that reason, I use it and find it useful.
Thank you for that answer, Dr. Bacote.
Somebody asked John Perkins when he was here on campus, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, about the public relations problem with the term evangelical. And they asked him about whether he's going to use it. And he said yes, because gospel is central to the word, the evangel is central to it. And he says something to the effect of, and why am I going to let crazy people be the ones that have that word? Right. You know. Now, I don't know if that's exactly whether crazy people was literally what he said, but it was something like that.
It sounds like something John Perkins would say.
And so and so what I think is important is and actually I'm with Dr. Janvier on this. Uh, when after people saw that 81% statistic in the 2016 general election, about 81% of white evangelicals voting for Trump, I said, as an idealist, if you just tell people what it really means,
Yeah.
right? So Dr. Janvier just said, sort of an Orthodox ecumenical, Protestant. If you tell people that, that'll correct it for people.
Mm,
That was being in a dream world, unfortunately, because there was so much
yeah.
of a change of the perception of the term to be arguably first socio-political and
Yeah.
second being a theological identity. And so now, I mean, if somebody says, "Are you an evangelical?" I'll say, "Absolutely." I mean, I say it in the documentary, so it's inescapable, I guess. But, but I
Yeah,
think,
that's there forever.
yeah, it is there for now. It's for posterity. But uh, the but if I'm talking to an audience, and if the term is going to require a lot of conversation just to get people to listen to me after I use the word, I'm not going to lead with that word.
Hmm.
Right. My strategy is to do whatever, say whatever I was going to say, then say something like, that's why I'm, a Bible Christian or whatever, and then say, but that's what I mean when I say evangelical.
Yeah.
In other words, so I've shown you what it is, and then I put the name evangelical on it. If it's an audience where the term evangelical isn't going to create a crisis, then I'll identify myself with the term. But when I mean it, I mean certainly for me, I've had significant formation in evangelical spaces, in evangelical institutions, and I largely appreciate that formation.
Yeah.
But I also know that in spite of the evangelical movement, at least I think kind of, when I'm thinking about white evangelical institutions particularly, I guess, there's this way where evangelical, if it means, hey, we're the people that have the story right because we're the Bible people. The problem is that, even then I was asking, okay, but are you talking about everything the Bible says? Are you And are you loving your neighbor like the Bible tells you to when
Yeah.
they tell you that there are other things we need to talk about and you don't talk about those things?
Yeah.
And so to me, that's always been part of the challenge, where are you getting political if you talk about race or something like that? And so that difficulty, I think, has been there. And so that makes it actually an aspirational thing that remains aspirational, but has been practiced very imperfectly.
Yes.
And so that I think is part of the complication of the term. And I think also this last thing, because when you say I'm committed to the Bible and everything, it's great to say you've got that commitment, but then you create an expectation out of that commitment. And
Yeah.
that sets up people to say when you don't do it, or you seem to be selective in what parts of the Bible you talk about while ignoring other things, or you emphasize certain things while ignoring others, then what happens is, people are saying, I'm not sure about what this means. Or if I say I'm committed to the Bible, do I need to share your exact commitments to be what evangelical is? And so that creates a lot of complication, has created, tremendous complication for a lot of people. So the aspiration, I think, is a good one, but people need to say it's an aspiration, but you'll see that people are still trying to live up to it, but they often have complications with that aspiration.
Yeah. Real quick before we transition, are there any books? I know you both have written about this topic extensively, but if there was some sort of resource that you would say, hey, go to this particular place or go to this book, what would you recommend for people around this topic?
One thing I'll recommend is, Walter Strickland has a two-volume series called Swing Low. So
Yeah.
there's an anthology, and then there's the narrative. The narrative is shorter, obviously. To me, I think that's probably one of the best places to go. So that would be the first thing that I would tell people.
For me, I would say there's a scholar named Albert Rabito, and he wrote a book called Slave Religion. And if you want to see Black evangelicals in their earliest formations, start there.
Dr.
Ex-
Janvier, can you also tell us a few names of Black evangelicals from that Second Awakening period, in addition to Douglas Morant, is that the in the other article? If you give us a name of a few others, just so people can know who some of these people are.
Okay, yeah. So you probably a lot of people know these names, but they don't know the tradition that they were theologizing out of. Richard Allen formed
yeah.
within Black evangelicalism. Jarena Lee formed within Black evangelicalism. Uh, gosh, his friend
Aslam Jones.
formed on this, yes, Absalom Jones. And I would even throw in there Frederick Douglass because he does wrestle with the evangelical experience, and he does wrestle with the nomenclature of evangelical. So if you want to start somewhere and get an understanding of like early Black evangelicals, start with those four. I love their stories.
Thank you.
Well, thank you guys for all your wisdom. This conversation can go on by itself, as I'm sure you guys both know, for hours and hours and hours. People should be writing about this. People should be studying about this. But um, we thank you for the little time that you've given us your wisdom, and it's been rich for us. We're going to transition to talking more about the documentary and specifically how the documentary helped, like, not only inform you, but how you feel like it's going to inform others. And I'm going to introduce two panelists who had huge parts to play in the documentary. The first individual was Ed Gilbreath. He has spent the last 3 decades as an editor, journalist, and communications leader in Christian media at Christianity Today, Urban Ministries, and others. He is one of the co-creators of Black and Evangelical. Thank you for joining us, Ed. And then lastly, we will introduce Daniel Long. He is a filmmaker, the owner of the production company Long Winter Media. He co-directed and produced Black and Evangelical alongside Bacote and Gilbreath, and he loves working with talented people. And I want to say this again, just thank you guys for the work that you've done. I know this has been a labor of love for many years. I know Vince has been I guess you can say, toiling over this for, I don't know, a decade plus, maybe. And Ed
At
kind of,
least the idea.
yeah, Ed joined you in that kind of dream. And then Daniel came along to help you guys bring this to, I guess you could say, a modality that we can all be blessed by it as for public consumption. And so, I want to just thank you for the great work. And then I also want to say for you guys who are joining us and who have not watched it, please, please go watch it at blackevangelicals.com. Blackevangelicals.com. All right, so first question I want to ask Ed is in what ways did making this film impact you?
Thank you for the honor of being a part of this, and everybody who's watching. Thanks for taking the time to celebrate
Absolutely.
this project with us. Um, the film impacted me. Really, it was a culmination of a lot of different things throughout my career. Um, I was one of, well, I believe I was the first Black editor at Christianity Today back in the early 90s. And soon sort of had this on the job training of realizing there are all these stories that weren't being told.
Mm,
And I had the privilege of connecting with a lot of the women and men that are highlighted in Black and evangelical. And so for me to be able to go from writing articles, interviewing these people throughout the years, to being able to capture them on film in a full length feature documentary. As Vince said, originally this was just going to be sort of a oral history, turn a tape recorder on type of project, but turned into an actual film with Dan's incredible help. And uh, to see it showcased in that format has just been an incredible blessing. And I'm just excited that more people will have the chance to experience uh, these individuals who we feature in the film and learn their stories and understand where that fits in the larger history.
excellent. Thank you. Daniel, what did you like? What did you learn about yourself, but also what did you, how did this film impact you? Oh, you're muted, my friend.
There we go.
Yeah.
Years of Zoom, still haven't learned to do that one first. Guys, thanks. Seriously, like everybody just kind of invited me into this space in a lot of ways. It started off just being kind of a hired hand to help record some of these interviews. And we realized like these characters have big stories, and then realized Dr. Bako and Ed have a big story to tell, and we had a talented team of people that could help us make a big story like really compelling. And so I think what came about is realizing there was more here than just a series of interviews to put out to the world, to actually bring something together around these chapters and themes that we have in the film. And that there are these crossroads that people live at. And so I think for me, it was learning, what does it mean to not just otherize this sort of story and just see
Mhm.
this as a story for Black and evangelical people, but to also see this as a story, where do I find myself in there? And that can be really uncomfortable, I think, in a lot of ways. There's a lot of hard truths. I remember being on set, and I think it was Dr. McCrae. Looked, looked like he was talking about, can white people be friends and can they be allies? He looked like right at me. And it was this moment of like kind of saying, Dan, who are you going to be in this sort of thing? And who are you going to be in this space? And honestly, like it wasn't, I think in a lot of ways, it's like living in this space of it just being on my social media feed, or living in this space where it just being in the books, or maybe just being in the movies I watched, there's this disconnect. But living here for around 2 years, working alongside Dr. Bacote and Ed, and getting in that space and realizing, wow, there's a lot more that needed to be changed in me than I realized. And I was telling my wife today, like, for the same reason I read stories to my daughter about women that are great, but also know I want my son to hear those stories. It's kind of the same reason that I feel like this is a story
Mm,
that isn't just for Black
yeah,
evangelicals. It's a story for white evangelicals. It's a story for non-evangelicals. These are people that have done
yeah,
incredible things, incredible spaces, spoken truth to power, spoken things that I think we need to hear. And in a lot of ways, it really did just become that look at me of just like, who are you going to be? And so now
yeah,
I'm sitting here at the end of the film and asking myself in a lot of ways, just like, who am I going to be now? While
yeah,
doing this film, that was one thing, but it's a lot of question of like, well, who am I going to be now? Now that I know these stories, because this isn't just
yeah.
history, this is today, right? And so that's a lot of how I changed there, and that's obviously just being friends with, Dr. Baco and Ed at the end of this has been a really great thing. So thanks, guys.
Oh, bless it. Bless it, bless it, bless it. Dr. Bacote, as an academic and a professor, usually approach projects with a theory. So the question, when you approach this particular project, this documentary, you maybe had a theory, a working theory, but what was that working theory? How did that theory potentially change and evolve over time? And what kind of reshaping did you experience in this process for yourself?
I think, well, first, strangely, I did not think about the project as a work of scholarship. Even though I was thinking people need to have this information, I wasn't thinking about, oh, hey, this is another thing that's going to go on my CV, filmmaker, right? I wasn't thinking about that at all. Other people have informed me that, yes, it counts. But I think initially, honestly, I was thinking about, okay, we just need to get this information out of Ron Potter's head.
Mm,
So in other words, just get these facts where, okay, this happened, these people were there, etc. And of course, as it went on, and particularly as Dan, Ed, and I worked together, we're thinking about how you tell the story, what to emphasize, and even I would say the work of trying to say, all right, what exactly is it that we're doing, right? Because I think um, if I'd say what's constant throughout is I wanted to say, okay, who are black evangelicals? How this develop a little bit? What are some common realities, some common struggles, and what are some positive directions for the future? And we have that in there, but I remember when we had a conversation with our editor Patrick Duff, who did an amazing job on this. Um, and he said, okay, what's like the truest thing here? And it really is about coming to think about this intersection of being black and evangelical. And I will say something that surprised me. Um, Off camera here, there is a copy of a student newspaper article I wrote back in the early 90s when I was a student at Trinity Divinity School.
mm,
And it's called Black and Evangelical and Uneasy Tension.
mm.
I think one of the interesting things was discovering that in this project, I was picking up what was going on, what I was talking about back then. And I had forgotten that I wrote that. And then I happened to see it. And I was like, oh my gosh. But that's all about, that being in that space. And so I think the project really was very helpful for me seeing the different ways people have navigated that. Um, the complexity, the places people came from that I had no idea. I mean, particularly like learning about the young life parts of this.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting all of those connections that when people were talking about those in some of the interviews. Um, and also just really seeing ways that um, people have been truthful, realist, and hopeful, right? Because truthful, realist, and hopeful doesn't always is not how it always works out. And I did see that happen. So to me, you know, thinking about those words as a way to talk about how people have kind of what kind of people they are uh, as they've navigated that sort of that in between space, that's
Yeah.
been very impactful.
Ed, you as a author and writer, sometimes you approach kind of with an unobtrusive disposition. And in this project, as you're just observing, collecting data about history, how did you become impacted by the stories? Did perspectives change for you as you were gathering information and asking people questions and engaging in this work along with Dr. Bacote?
Yeah, it was actually a lot of fun to be able to try out the storytelling craft on in this format because so many of the stories that we're telling in the film and the people that we talk to, I mean, these are amazing people,
Hmm.
incredible stories, and very how do I say it? There's a lot of characters too. I mean, they're very uh, um, uh, very funny people in terms of their perspectives and being able to have a really positive perspective on a lot of the hard stuff that they
Hmm.
experience and that this history represents. And I had to really figure out how to make that switch from trying to what it means to write the story as I'd done as a journalist, as a print journalist or
Yeah.
digital, um, make the switch to film. And I really wanted people to feel the interaction with the different subjects the way that I have experienced them and felt them over the years. And
Hmm.
I'm just pleased that I think we succeeded, not totally, but for the most part, giving glimpses of their heart, their humor, and just the struggles that they experience, and being able to feel that was a thing. And
Hmm.
I have to give a lot of credit to Dan as our resident filmmaker here, who helped sort of instruct us, how to make that switch to storytelling on film versus just written.
And let me
And
just add to that real quickly. For me, both Ed and Dan really helped me in terms of thinking about that part too, because sometimes we'd be talking about it and they'd be talking about particularly how is this going to be impactful? How are people feeling this? And certainly they both were really good coaches when I did all that narration. They were like, how about one more take of that, Vince? Like giving us a little bit more, emotion out of that. Not that I didn't have the emotion, but I think they were really helpful, I think, for just thinking about the fact that, this is not just information. This is three-dimensional.
yeah.
And so I think it was just I just want to give them their flowers for that. It was really helpful in illuminating me about that part.
Well, Daniel, speaking of this being three-dimensional work, you and I have engaged back and forth over the year, and I've learned a lot about you. And one of the things I've learned is that you, because of this work, have learned so much about evangelical history, more specifically Black evangelical history, that a lot of folks, and I would even say a lot of my friends who probably went to seminary and who consider themselves theological scholars don't even know. So, as a white evangelical, what experience, how has this become a real value for your own personal journey? And how has this story kind of prepared you to re-engage white audiences, but Black audiences as well? And why should this film be something that is, I guess, prevalent or important or pertinent, better yet, in white evangelical spaces?
Yeah, I think gosh, it's such a big thing. There's a point in which filmmaking, if you're going to be honest, like it has to stop being about pointing fingers and trying to lecture somebody, and it has to be more about turning it back
Mm,
and kind of lecturing yourself with it. And so I can just say, like having spent 2 years listening to the Dr. Purnell's, Dr. A.G. Miller's, the the characters that are in this film and nuancing and hearing these stories, that these are things that really kind of speaking back in this space. So a lot of it became about talking back to myself and the things that like I needed to learn and stop trying to make this about the broader white evangelicals that are out there that might be on the other side of the aisle from me or might be a different kind of Christian than me or might be even just kind of different person than me and just kind of bring it back this space. And so things that got in there, I think these guys were talking about where did film story come to this place? And I think one thing that we learned along the way is this story didn't end at the high of Urbana 70. Urbana
Mhm.
70, this great speech that Tom Skinner gives is the middle. And it was really key. And this is where, as TT's making more and more media and they're doing more of this long form from podcasts to other forms, short form stories that we're getting more and more used to, we tell just up to the high of an Urbana 70. But it's important in this long form story that the story went past that to see not only how a Tom Skinner gets rejected or a Bill Pinnell, but also looking into like the racial reconciliation era. And that part that we talk about in the 90s, where you have this immense amount of saying sorry that also comes falling short because it's like the sorry that doesn't have the final action. And like, I think if I just said sorry to my wife but didn't change my behavior or anything, that she wouldn't be my wife anymore. We know how it goes.
Right, right,
And
right.
so there's this sense that this story and hearing everybody talk, and particularly hearing a lot of Dr. Bill Pinnell, the things that he would say and be able to be in the space with people and make them laugh and yet also cut so deep and just see this love that was like, listen, all this pain that has been caused by this community, I'm still here. I'm still here because we're about something. We're about gospel and we're about Jesus. And Jesus didn't just care about the not yet, cared about the now. Jesus didn't just care about, the blessed are the spirit, but blessed are the poor, blessed are the people that are physically, the physical part that's here. And it was that part that I feel like I learned listening to all these folks is how do you be part of something that is now and not yet? And what
Yes.
does that look like? And how do you do that? And you're asking that question of like, why still identify as an evangelical? And it doesn't really matter whether it's the word evangelical or not. Maybe lowercase e evangelical, as we talk about in the film, versus capital E evangelical, something I can relate to, but it's gospel at that core. And I feel like this is a group listening to their sermons, reading their books, being in the space, talking with them, listening to these interviews that Vincent Ed would have with them, and just hearing this is gospel that's going on here. And that's something that's everybody, not just me. And it takes us, for white evangelicals, it can take us from a space of just saying sorry to taking us to a space where it's like we can actually like change behavior and actually find places to really lead the charge. It's really great. Just the last thing I'll say is like it's really great to just be kind of a hired hand and let like Dr. Bacote and Ed lead this charge and then find myself, being a part of that whole thing. And I think in so many ways there's a lot that we can learn about how to actually listen better and actually, do that thing that follows up beyond the sorry and actually change. And so this is, I don't know, a lot of things came out of this project and spending like a whole long time with people about it.
One of the central figures of the story is Dr. Bill Purnell, and he passed away last year. Was he able to watch a version or a cut of this documentary before he passed?
I don't think so because he died in October, or
Gotcha.
maybe
November.
late September. What was that? What was that? Late September, early October.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Our editor, I want to throw so Patrick Duff has made a great film called The Gospel According to Bill Pinnell, and I know that Dr. Pinnell got to see that one, and I can recommend that out to everybody. And while I'm throwing out just a few names, also we've got listening in the background here is Jill Caballero, who's an associate producer on this, also happens to be Vince's assistant. She did a whole lot of things. Uh,
Tremendous, tons of things. Tons of
Tons
things.
of things, tons of things. Show you connected us to an incredible composer and sound mixer, Nate Robinson, on this project. And so I'm just going to take that moment to just say, I love end credits of films, not because I know everybody that's on there, but just because you get to see that this is not just three people who made this thing, but it's just a ton of people that did it. And all of them had massive contributions. So
I love
Yeah.
you. This is
And
you're practicing your Oscar speech right here.
and I'll just add real quick. You'll also see the name Joy Trigloff in there as a person that's dedicated to. So she was
Yeah.
Jill's predecessor, and she passed away unexpectedly, in 2022. And but she was very excited about this project, and was involved with us in the early stages.
All right, so before we open it up to the Q&A, and for those who are watching, we will be on live until about 8:15 Central Time. I mean,
PM.
I'm sorry, Eastern Time.
Yeah.
8:15 Eastern Time. So about another
Yeah.
20 minutes, 25 minutes. I have one question, and if you guys can answer this briefly, was there anything that shocked you? Like, was there something that you learned that shocked you with in doing this work that you were like, I did not know that, and this is something that I probably will never forget. One of the things that was really revealing to me was that Tom Skinner had gospel tracks in the form of kind of like Marvel Comics. I thought that was really, really interesting. We don't see a lot of gospel tracks these days, but to see his own testimony and story told in the form of gospel tracks was so interesting. And seeing that he was kind of forward thinking during that time. The other thing I thought was really interesting about this documentary is that there wasn't really a sugarcoating of the black evangelical, not only experience when it comes to being outside of your own kind of walls, but even within, that there were tension within
Mm.
the certain movements. And I think that was well done. It felt honest because oftentimes there's a dissonance between even black folks that we don't like to talk about. Like we feel like if we show that, then that discredits the movement in some sort of way. Um, but if you don't
Yeah,
have any, go ahead.
I was going to say, just answering your question, because it took me a while, because I wasn't really shocked by anything because I knew a lot of these stories before. But I think what was sort of jarring was, no, not visually, we had to represent the film. It's not just spoken; it's you got to show it visually. And some of the archival images
Mm,
that were dug up I'd never seen before, and to see some of those historical shots of the people, the subjects was amazing. I mean, seeing Dr. Ruth Bentley as the sole Black woman in this large white board of directors for Wheaton College, or just things like that. Just I knew those things happened, but seeing the actual images, Howard Jones on stage with Billy Graham. I mean, just just powerful to see.
yeah. Well, also
What's so
shout out to Solection and wait, did I say that? I don't the the music
Soul
Soul Liberation?
Soul Liberation.
Mhm.
Shout out to Soul Liberation because in a lot of ways, I think Soul Liberation is sort of I guess you can say, the catalyst for a lot of the kind of cr Christian movement in Black
Mm.
evangelical spaces today. So, and their music is on the web and you can listen to it. So, anyway, so real
Yeah.
quick before we move into this Q&A.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think one thing, not so much shocking, but just thinking about the weight of it, you know, um, thinking about Howard Jones' experience as this first Black evangelist with Billy Graham, and what he experienced, both with people not wanting him on the platform, people resenting him, and then also the tension though he had within NBEA or among Black evangelicals because he was with Graham. I mean, the tension that he experienced and the way he experienced is the kind of thing that it just lands on you. This weight of a pioneer. We talk about pioneers and we think, oh, how amazing it was that they were a pioneer, and not thinking about what they were dealing with, what may have been excruciating for them as they were pursuing a path of faithfulness.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to bring back Dr. Janvier. And there are a number of questions. Hopefully, we'll get to a majority of them. There are some that we can actually potentially type responses to, like books, to name the books and the authors. But the first question is, what might the first Black evangelicals have to say about Black evangelicalism today? What advice might they have for us? Anyone like to tackle that? One or two people, briefly. Remember, we have about 20 minutes. Go ahead, Dr. Janvier.
I think the first Black evangelicals would say we're still living the same story because the same fractures that were there um, in the antebellum period on into the Reconstruction period, those same fractures showed up in the 20th century revitalized form of Black evangelicalism. So if you go back and you read some of their stories, I'll give you one slave narrative to read. It's the story of William Wells Brown, and you could see how he's struggling with evangelical Christianity, which he names evangelical Christianity as a person who can identify with it, but as a person who is very upset by it because he's an enslaved man as he begins his life who has heard many pro-slavery sermons, and he escapes to Canada and he holds on to his faith, but within him he has this incredible tension because the people that he shares this evangelical tradition with are also the people that are holding his people in slavery. So same fractures, different day is what I think they would say to us right now.
Thank you, Phil, for that question. The next question comes from David Bland. He asked the question, he says, I'm not a Christian, but he's trying to look for a distinction between, he said, Roman Catholicism aside, what is the distinction between evangelicals and non-evangelical Christians?
That depends upon how you're thinking about evangelicals. So uh, well, in terms of what I call the best face of evangelicalism, the way they want to, in terms of that aspiration I talked about earlier, evangelicals would be characterized by the strong emphasis and commitment to the truthfulness of the Bible and to this centrality of Christ's saving work, the need to share that and the need to share that faith. And some non-evangelicals, their view of the Bible is not as high.
Mhm.
Some of them might question a lot of the truthfulness of it. Um, they'll emphasize different things. Um, I mean, to me, that's probably the biggest thing. But I think uh, politically, politically now, I would say, politically as like the last 50 years, at least white evangelicals have been more associated with Republican politics. If you're talking about black evangelicals, that's obviously not the case. Um, although there definitely are some that are Republicans, so let's not fail to acknowledge that.
Mhm.
Um, but whereas a lot of non-evangelicals would be found in mainline Protestant denominations. That's your United Methodist, your Presbyterian Church USA, that type of context. And they're in different worlds sometimes.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the ways of talking about it. Institutions are different, but the core commitments in terms of the truthfulness of the Bible is probably that would work. That would shake out differently between evangelical and non-evangelicals. And there are some, by the way, I should add one thing. Dr. Janvier mentioned that it used to be the case that evangelicals were definitely not Roman Catholics. Some people say that Roman Catholics can be evangelical. And there are certainly some Roman Catholics, they're like, hey, we may have the Apocrypha, but we're Bible people too. So so you do have some that also want to claim that label.
Ed, and while I ask this question, Bacote and Dr. Janvier, you guys can definitely answer, but I would also love for you to take an opportunity to type the books that you've suggested into the chat so that people who have been asking that question can, so the Albert Robotov book, the Just the books that you mentioned earlier or other books that you would suggest that they read. All right, this next question is, could you kind of describe the current state of Black evangelicals and Black evangelicalism, Ed? Where do you think it is?
Well, I can only speak for myself in the end here. Uh, I feel like we have uh, Dan mentioned earlier the sequence in the film during the '90s era where there was this outpouring of interest in racial reconciliation and
Mm,
lots of historic institutions issuing statements about the importance of racial unity and apologies for their role in past sins. And there was a period there where it felt like there was momentum, like we are moving towards something where we were recognizing the history and that we were ready to move towards um, standing up as the church in a way that could be uh, an example, a model to the world of how to address our divisions. And but somewhere along the way, we stumbled or were not able to see the necessity of as Dan mentioned, action that was required to move things forward. And I just feel like we're sort of stuck right now in a place where uh, um, we are not able
yeah.
to move forward.
My little 2 cents on this is that I didn't know I was evangelical until, or I didn't know I was operating in evangelical spaces until somebody told me I was operating in evangelical spaces. I thought I was just a black dude who loved Jesus. And then somebody told me, man, you're evangelical. And I was like, well, what does that mean? And the one thing I will say is that if and when I am, I guess you can say, in evangelical spaces or operating, the one thing that I grieve is the lack of ownership we have in particular spaces to distribute information or to galvanize outside of like our actual local churches. When I think about music, especially in the CCM or Christian hip hop, oftentimes you have to go through majority white spaces. When I think about gatherings, there are very few conferences where people connect. And so, what I would encourage is to really think through what does it look like to like own the history, to tell the history, but also to have a space where people can say, if I need to retreat to individuals that I think have a like-mindedness around the orthodoxy and orthopraxy, I go here. And one thing that I would encourage anyone who's listening or people who will watch this is that we need to write more. We need to definitely write more. And there is a scarcity of writing out there. But I'll
We do need
also
more of that. Yeah. Yeah.
want to shout out, there's an individual who asked a question today, Heyman Cross, and it reminds me of my faith experience. And I came to know the Lord at an Impact conference where he preached and where he spoke. And I'll never forget what Impact did for me as an individual. And Jimmy McGee is the individual who leads that now. And I think about institutions like that and why we need institutions like Impact, because it gathered thousands of African American students from HBCUs and other universities to hear from Black evangelicals or Black Christians. And it led us to be missionaries in our respective spaces. And I think we need that. So the next question would be, in this particular time we live, given the wide support of Donald Trump among many evangelicals, and which this writer assumes that it is not shared amongst Black evangelicals, as the statistics say that it's not, to what extent does the political difference get in the way of fellowship amongst those people who fall on the different paradigms of this political or social political space that evangelicalism has created?
Um, it depends, honestly. I think part of the problem is it's easy to assume that because somebody has political affiliation, that then I know everything about their disposition. In other words, just because someone voted for Donald Trump doesn't necessarily mean that they are wearing a MAGA hat, right? And so there are people who, uh, I said to my class in 2016 after Trump won, I said, look, here's what you got to understand. I said, a lot of white evangelicals, only an act of God, an angelic visitation would have made them vote for Hillary Clinton. There's no way they were going to do it. And so he was the guy, he was the Republican, so he was going to get it no matter what, right? And I think there are some people, and I know some of these people. I mean, I can have conversations with them, and I think I could even some of them I could even have political conversations. The climate we're in makes that more challenging because the climate orients us to presume that if I know who you voted for, now you've told me everything about who you are. And the fact is that everybody who votes the same way, they aren't all the same people. They've got different reasons, different motivations for doing that. So there at least I think there's at least the opportunity for fellowship with some people who are willing to have actual, if you actually really want to get to know people and ask questions and not just have competing narratives that you speak back to each other and talk across each other. There are definitely people who I think with different socio-political commitments where that can be the case. I was just talking to a friend last night. He's a Democrat. His best friend was unfortunately deceased now. They were very different politically, but these guys would go fishing all the time. So I think it's possible. I think our environment conspires to make it challenging. Um, but so I think it's possible, but it does require, I think, a willingness for people to say, all right, we need to set some ground rules so that we can actually make sure that we really have a conversation. And that what we're not leading with is assumptions about what I think I know about you because of who you voted for or because of other things. And that is possible with some people. Now, there are definitely people where that's not possible. But
Hmm.
the part of the way I like to think about it is to say, I know I don't want anybody intentionally misunderstanding me. And so if it's a situation where it seems like conversation might be possible, and so then it's worth venturing the conversation. But I think we need to be willing to have the patience, but while also knowing that some conversations they're just not going to be fruitful.
Would anybody else like to tackle that question, or we're going to move on to the? Well, there are two questions that kind of seem to exist in the same world. It's basically a question around what is the difference between Black evangelical, the political persuasion, and maybe theological posture then, and maybe the political and theological posture now? Has there been a significant shift? And if there have been any shifts, what have you noticed?
Because Black evangelicalism is
Oh,
ecumenical,
Dr.
and
Janvier,
Dr. Janvier is going to go, yeah.
you're on mute. There you go.
Yeah. Go ahead, Dr. Janvier, you go ahead, and then I'll follow up.
Okay, in terms of the past, if you were to look at the issues that Black people who could vote, which was very small during the antebellum period, um, let's widen it and not even think about just voting, but were politically active in different ways. They were their main issue were issues around Black liberation and issues where Black people could have wholeness, peace, and liberty in this country. Now, at that time, they would have been more so when they got the right to vote, they would have been Republican because the party of Lincoln was the party that freed them. Now, if you look at Black evangelicals today, a lot of us are still saying the same things. We organize our political lives a lot of times around um, Black wholeness, Black liberation, trying to get peace and security in this country. Now, because Republican back then is different from what Republican is now, and more so Black people are in the Democratic Party, you will look at that as, a change. But when it comes to the substance around what they were organizing themselves around, Black liberation, wholeness, peace, is not really too much different. Now, how you define liberation, that gets fractured out among different types of Black people and different types of Black Christians. And this is where it's important, where Black evangelicals are in contradistinction to a lot of, we'll say, mainline progressive Christians on what liberation looks like. So it can get fractured, but I would say as a whole, when you're looking at Black evangelicals then and now, we're still organizing around Black liberation.
I concur with that and add that I think one complication in the last maybe 30, 40 years is that some people, because of their formation in white evangelical spaces, uh, they might be people that wind up being more conservative politically and have certain priorities, but still by and large, without Janvier saying those other issues, they they present themselves and you have to deal with them.
And I'll just say quickly that those Black people who were raised in a more conservative environment in the antebellum period, people like John Chavez, go back and look at his story and see why, as a Black person, he was advocating for or advocating against emancipation. And you're like, there's a problem here when Black people are only raised around white evangelicals. When Black people are disconnected from the larger Black community, you see a different politic.
I want to.
One thing real quick, by the way, because I messed up what I was supposed to do in terms of writing in the answer. So Hope Gray, I hope, good to see you. That book by Walter Strickland, it's a 2-volume series. It's called Swing Low. That's the name of it. Walter Strickland.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
And so I want to read something before we go to the last kind of words from all of our panelists. It's from Peter Pannell. He says, thank you, Dad, Bill Pannell, who I mentioned and who is one of the central figures in this documentary. He says he would have been blown away by this film. There was never a space that Dad occupied that Jesus wasn't there. I grew up with Tom Skinner, Stan Long, and Carl Ellis sitting in our living room. What an amazing group of men. Most of all, they all treated my mom, Hazel, with respect and love. Cheers to this team for memorizing such a vital piece of history. Amen, amen. In
Thank you,
30
Peter.
seconds, is it possible in 30 seconds for each of you, or for each of you to give a last word in 30 seconds, a last charge, maybe something that's just on your heart that you probably felt like you didn't get a chance to say? Ed, would you like to start us off?
Sure, and you can cut me off or start playing the music if I go over.
Thank you. I will do that.
I just want to say thank you to everyone again. I mean, I'm deeply grateful for the opportunity, the privilege to be able to work on this project and for the world to discover it. And just thankful for all of you. And I am hopeful. We are living in a different time right now, and I hesitate to talk around the politics and stuff because it's so fraught with just things we haven't seen in this era before. And I'm just hopeful that our unity, our call to be one in Christ will be energized through this film.
Amen. 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 Daniel, do you have any last words for us?
Yeah, it comes to mind what Dr. Janvier said about how white progressives don't align what they think is liberation with how Black evangelicals might perceive that liberation. I think that was one of the biggest takeaways for me in this film, and I think it's pretty important to, if I would just say to other white progressives like myself, that we don't get it. in a lot of ways. And I think spending time, not just reading a book, but spending time with this community and listening is just a massive important thing for us to do, to learn. And so thanks to Dr. Bako and Ned for giving me a chance to work with you guys and learn in this whole thing. So that's it.
Excellent. Dr. Janvier?
Um, my closing thought is we have a long history in this thing. And if you want to see a sketch of it, start with W.B. Du Bois's The Negro Church. Go to Carter G. Woodson's The History of the Negro Church, and then follow up with the work that Rabbitoh was building off of theirs, which is slave religion, and go back to some of these mainline Black churches that were formed in the antebellum period. Look up
Mhm.
their founders, and you'll begin to see Black evangelicals in the earliest years of American evangelicalism.
Excellent. Thank you. And we'll close with Dr. Bako.
First, thanks for everybody who's on here who helped bring this together. All the people, they're in the credits. One more shout out to Jill Caballero for just all of her behind the scenes work, organizing everything. So thank you for that. One thing I do want to just state as an important point of encouragement to whoever is watching this now or later. I think one of the things I'm so thankful for in the film is when Ruth Bentley says, it was her vocation to be in a place like Wheaton. It's not everybody's place to be in a place like Wheaton, like I'm at here in my office, right? The point is, 1 Corinthians 12, there's a lot of gifts in the body, a lot of places for people to be. And so some people, a place like this is a place for them to be, but there's a lot of other places. So I just want people to be encouraged to seek right, their Ephesians 2:10, the works that God has for you.
Amen.
Where is that living into that, utilizing the agency that you have, because your disappointment does not have to discourage you from doing that. So I'm not going to turn that into preaching, but there we go.
Well, thank you guys for joining us. It's been a privilege and an honor. There were a lot of questions that went unanswered. And one of the things I would like to try to do is for those people who registered is to potentially have some of these questions maybe answered in the form of the written word through our newsletter that we put out at the Big Tent Initiative, so the Mosaic. So we'll be adding you to our newsletter and we'll try to send out responses to some of these questions. I'll probably try to enlist the help of some of these individuals on this particular call to respond to these questions. But if you are interested in learning more about the documentary, if you haven't watched it, do that, and you can do that at blackevangelicals.com. You can actually, when you scroll down, you can, I guess you can fill out information to get a screening in your church, in your community, in your neighborhood, whatever. Just fill out that information, or you can reach out to us for more information in regards to how you can connect with Daniel, Vince, and Ed. Thank you guys for your work. Thank you guys for your time. Thank you for attending. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May he shine his face on you and show you mercy.